Release That Witch. Audiobook, Part 23.
Chapter 309, An Exploration of Knowledge. Roland received an encrypted letter from the king's city. It was most likely a letter from his guard, Theo, for the letter was delivered by a carrier pigeon. After taking the note off the bird's paw, Roland walked to the window and started to peruse its content in the bright sunlight. Your Highness, your plan was an astounding success. As the access to the palace was soon blocked, I did not know how profound the impact of the bombing was until later. By the evening, almost every resident in the king's city has been talking about the incident. It's the only thing people are now discussing. Where there's a little knot of people, rumors follow, no matter it's a hotel, an inn, or the square. Nothing has ever created such a great commotion, not even the death of the previous king. Because of your warning earlier, now many people are of opinion that Timothy died in the accident, and that you'll soon come to the king's city to ascend the throne, becoming the new sovereign of the kingdom of Grey Castle. Roland felt relieved as he read this paragraph. No news could be better than the success of the bombing operation and the safe return of the witches. He made himself some tea and returned to the mahogany desk to continue to read the letter. Nonetheless, based on the information I've collected so far, the great nobles outside the king's city have yet to have any reaction to this matter. On the contrary, the palace soon came up with a countermeasure. Therefore, I conjecture that Timothy Wimbledon may still be alive. Further, someone boasted that the attack was out of God's will, for some residents saw a pale, white object descend from the sky and plunge into the palace. In view of the above noted, my preliminary plan is to proclaim the bombing as a God's punishment for the atrocities the usurper committed. I believe many people will buy this explanation. My employees are all excited about this operation. They've collected quite a bit of information on some of the most obnoxious crimes Timothy committed. Combined with the recent incident, the argument will be convincing. I hold that within a month, the rumor about Timothy's wicked acts will be circulated all over the city and reach every citizen through rats in the Black Street. In addition, I'll continue to closely monitor the movement of the Barak at the eastern suburb. From the current situation, however, I assume Timothy will leave it as it's for the time being until he develops a strategy to defend the city. There was no signature at the end of the letter. Roland folded the encrypted letter and put it into the drawer after finishing reading it. He breathed out a long sigh. If the Easterly Wind No. 1 could prevent Timothy from sending out his troops, that would be perfect. It would be a huge waste of population to form a drugged army. The later Timothy commenced the war, the greater chance he would have to increase his manpower. Roland raised the teacup and sipped the scented black tea. The next thing he should do was to wait for the return of the witches. He had felt a little strange and uneasy with Anna's absence and the intact dried fish in the drawer in the past few days. Just then, Carter pushed the office door open. Your Highness, 2 fleets arrived at the dock. Roland was a bit surprised. That's the fleet of Margaret's Chamber of Commerce's, isn't it? She just missed a show. Hang on, there are 2 fleets you said? Yes, Carter replied with a smile. Some members of the emissary delegation you sent to the South region for recruitment have just come back. The dock is now packed with the refugees they brought. The city hall is currently busy in screening them according to your procedure. I mean the plan you implemented with Miss Lily. The quarantine protocol. Yes, that's it. This is to eliminate the possible existence of the demonic plague. The chief knight coughed in embarrassment. There are around 400 to 500 people coming here. Really? Roland could not help smiling. He was satisfied to see some progress in his plan. It seemed that Lotus had to arrange accommodations for more people. Let's go and take a look. Kalsichi put down the thin book. The sentence I see fell from his lips and gradually turned into a repetitive murmur. Mentor? Chavez asked with some concerns. Kyle had not been asleep for 2 days since he received intermediate chemistry. He had been reading the ancient book almost day and night. Chavez had once stolen a glance at the contents, but they were too profound and difficult for him to comprehend. I'm very well, the chief alchemist answered vigorously. His voice was the most passionate one without a hint of weariness. Although there was a thin layer of crust at the corner of Kyle's eyes, his pupils were glistening with excitement. The chief alchemist did not by any means look like a person in lack of sleep. As a common rule, a student was not allowed to interrupt his mentor while the latter was conducting research on alchemy. Therefore, Chavez did not speak until now. I don't really get this book. What's an atom, and what's an electron? You're now a qualified alchemist, and you don't need to regard yourself as a student any longer. We're currently what High Highness refers to as colleagues. Kyle paused for a second and then continued, as to your question, I don't have an answer either. In fact, His Highness also gave me this book when he handed intermediate chemistry to me. Chavez looked at another book placed on the desk. The cover indicated the name of the book was Natural Science Theoretical Foundation. Mr. Sichi. Apparently not accustomed to this way of addressing, Chavez stuttered. It seems the book has nothing to do with alchemy. No, I mean with chemistry. I thought so, too. Kyle stroked his beard. However, after I skimmed through a few pages, I realized that I actually know nothing about the world. What? Chavez was stunned at Kyle's conclusion. The sole research subjects of alchemists were the constitution of objects and the nature of elements. If they were considered as ignorant, the rest of ordinary people would be no smarter than monkeys. I mean ideas. The chief alchemist was exhilarated and contented at the same time. We don't really think out of the box but simply regard alchemy as an exploration of substances. We think it bears no relations with the rising and setting sun or the decline and flourish of a flower. Isn't that so? The movements of the sun and stars are the research subjects of astrologers. As to plants, Chavez commented somewhat contemptuously, only farmers and pharmacists care about them. That's why we're ignorant of the world. Kyle shook his head. This book connects everything together from the beginning. Stones, flowers, grass, thunders and flames all consist of the same thing and follow a certain set of rules. These rules don't only apply to chemical reactions, but also apply to the rise and set of the sun, the bloom and fading of flowers. The rules are so accurate and consistent that as long as the conditions at the starting point are the same, the results will be identical. Chemistry, after all, only takes a very small part. How can it be possible? I also feel it incredible. Kyle spread out the periodic table of elements and explained, intermediate chemistry asserts that each element has a specific shape, consisting of a big sphere and many small ones surrounding it. The big sphere determines an element, whereas the number and the layers of the small spheres determine the element's property. This table here organizes all the elements based on this rule. The tabular arrangement is as orderly as a line of soldiers. Even I haven't completely figured out what His Highness was actually trying to convey. The prince believes that one can know the property and the reaction mechanism of an element even without actually seeing or touching it. Its underlying reason is that the nature of a chemical reaction is the loss and gain of small balls. The reaction itself won't affect big balls. That's also why during a chemical reaction, elements won't disappear but will just transfer. Chavez contemplated for a while and asked, "Do you believe it?" These theories were just so abstract as to be verified through experiments. Chavez wondered how the author of the book got to know all of these. Kyle smiled. I don't know. That's why I couldn't answer your previous question. No matter you believe it or not, the point is that the book has told us to view things from a perspective that we've never thought of. It shows me another realm beyond chemistry. Kyle paused for a moment and then said, unfortunately, His Highness did not write all the elements down. He probably doesn't understand what he has exactly missed. Chavez did not quite understand what Kyle had just said. He felt bewildered as if he had once again become that new apprentice who, for the first time of his life, had come across alchemy terminologies and overwhelmed by this foreign language. Yet he was not worried. As long as he followed the guidance of his mentor, he would eventually learn the so-called connections between everything. He had much more time to study than the chief alchemist. After a while, Chavez broke the silence. By the way, why are the books given by His Highness labeled with different colors? The chief alchemist uttered an exclamation. I didn't notice that. Did he just randomly label them? However, he soon shook his head. No, they can be random if they're only in black and red. These pigments are particularly hard to make, so it can't just be a coincidence. That means His Highness did it on purpose, didn't he? Elementary chemistry was in blue, natural science theoretical foundation blue, elementary mathematics green, and intermediate chemistry, remnant, purple. These colors did not pop up when being singled out. They became quite eye-catching, however, when being put together. Perhaps for some aesthetic reasons? Chavez presumed. Chapter 310, The Pure Witches. Standing on the top of a hillside, Maine looked out over Wolf Heart City. In merely 3 months, it completely changed. The last time he had come here, its city wall built with neat, white snowstones from the kingdom of Everwinter had been like stain-free white teeth of a newborn wolf, but now the blood-stained, damaged wall looked brown and mottled. Broken parts of it were hastily mended with the local black rocks or even wooden frames and plates. Looking from afar, this rough, dirty wall was like dreadful fangs of an old wolf who had gnawed many animals and become a real predator. The church's forces camped at a place around 2,500 meters away from Wolf Heart City. Less soldiers of the church came here this time. In case that the Queen of Clearwater would sneak attack the old holy city, the church reserved some forces to guard it and only sent 800 God's Punishment warriors, 5,000 Judgment warriors and 5,000 Transport Corps men here to conquer Wolf Heart City, but Maine was fully confident in capturing this city, with the secret weapons and the pure witches. Your Eminence, siege beasts have been set in place, ready to attack. A priest ran to the top of the hillside and reported to him. What about the pure witches? They're ready, too. He lifted a telescope in front of his eye to observe the battlefield. 2 siege beasts were crouching 1,000 meters away from Wolf Heart City, hiding themselves well under a thatched shed and surrounded by planks. It was hard for anyone seeing with naked eyes from afar to notice those 2 ferocious-looking weapons. In front of the siege beasts stood the God's Punishment army formed by soldiers converted from the most pious believers of the church. They remained upright and motionless in the autumn wind. All the enemies who had fought against them had been overwhelmed by their might. As they were unable to act independently in battles, they were controlled by their commanders who mingled among them under the guise of God's Punishment warriors. As for these commanders, even the church people, except the Pope and 3 archbishops, had no idea who they were. Good, now you can return to your position and wait for the attacking horn. Maine nodded with satisfaction. Yes, Your Eminence. Now it was time to summon the Supreme Pontiff's pure witches. Thinking of them, Maine could not help but knit his eyebrows. Totally different from the other witches raised up by the church, they behaved as they pleased even in the army. If his own pure witches acted like this, he would punish them by whips, but he could not treat these 2 pure witches like that, as they held equivalent positions to him in the church. After all, Supreme Pontiff had only ordered them to assist him in this battle, not to follow his order. No matter how they behaved, he still needed their help to eliminate the enemies. He walked down the slope to the pure witches' tent outside the battalion. Just as he had expected, he found no one in the tent when he lifted up the door curtain. Where did Zero and Isabella go? He asked. A judgment warrior stood at the door. The 2 ladies are interrogating prisoners and should be in the east of the battalion. There's a flat open space. You'll see it when you walk in that area. Do you need me to call them over? Said the guard. I won't come here if you can invite them out. And it's a captive game again. Haven't they got tired of it yet? Maine complained inwardly and said to the guard with a gloomy face, No, I'll go there to have a look. He soon came to the place mentioned by the guard. Surrounded by lots of judgment warriors, 2 women stood in the middle. In front of them, there were 3 captives whose hands were tied behind their backs. One woman leaning forward was whispering something to the captives with a soft and intent look on her face. Her white hair and corners of her white robe danced in the wind, making her look like a pure elf. The other woman, who got a great body, blonde wavy hair and a dulcet voice chuckled now and then. Maine said to the Chief Justice beside him, "Order all the Judgment Warriors to leave this place at once, including the ones in charge of those captives." "Yes, Your Eminence." The blonde witch noticed this. She said something to the other witch and then quickly walked toward Maine. "Your Eminence." She slightly bowed to him and continued, "Why do you drive away all the audience? The trial will begin right away." He nodded back to greet her and said, "Lady Isabella, the full-range attack on Wolf Heart City is about to begin. At this moment, there's no point in interrogating captives. Besides, they're just scouts we caught along the way and can offer little valuable information. If you can, I hope you two immediately come to the front line. Relax, now that we're here, it's impossible for any important enemy to escape. As for the trial, I can't stop her. Given that, how about you watching it here? It won't take a long time, anyway," Isabella said while spreading her hands. "The same trial game? Well, the rules are basically the same." She smiled. "Zero just loves this kind of games. So, start it immediately." Maine tried his best to suppress his anger to put on an expressionless face, but he swore inwardly. "Damn. What the hell is this trial game? It should be called the cat and mouse game. In this game, a captive has to get out of a certain area set by Zero or defeat her to get a slim chance of survival. These seemingly easy tasks, which are actually something the captives could never complete, are thrown out by Zero as baits to lure the captives into her traps. It was not a fair game at all, and what the pure witch did was far from a good, pure deed. This was the reason Maine had ordered to send away all the Judgment Warriors who were in charge of protecting and monitoring the pure witches. He was afraid that watching this would shake their faith in the church. He made up his mind that when he became a pope, he must strictly teach these witches to obey orders. At this moment, Zero had already untied the ropes binding the captives. She stretched out her arms to show that she did not carry any weapon, but the captives had a long sword, a bent blade and a light crossbow placed in front of them. "Come on, fight or escape. Follow your own heart. Only deities can make a decision," she said with a calm face and a gentle tone. One of the captives clenched his teeth and picked up the crossbow to shoot at the pure witch close at hand in a sudden. Immediately after that, he grabbed the sword to strike at her, planning to leave her no time to react. He had done all those actions in just one smooth motion, which indicated that he was not just an ordinary militia fighter. However, his sword did not hit the pure witch. Zero easily evaded the sudden strike by swiftly moving 2 steps backward. When he lifted up his head, he was agape seeing the witch holding the arrow between her lips, as if it were a common twig. Zero spat out the arrow and said with a smile, "Go on, please." The captive's eyes widened in fright. Seeing his trembling hands, Maine was sure that most of the courage that he had just plucked up was gone now, and all the remaining courage, if any, was only enough for his last strike. As the Archbishop expected, after a moment of hesitation, the captive gave full vent to his feelings in a loud roar and dashed toward the unarmed witch, with a sword in hand. There was nothing at all skillful about the captive's desperate last strike. Maine could know what would happen next, even with his eyes closed. Having spent only half a month with Zero, he was impressed by her amazing ability. She was not an extraordinary, but could definitely compete with extraordinaries in terms of combat skills. She was not extremely powerful or resilient, but incredibly skillful. Even without magic power, she would still make an excellent fighter. Zero edged to one side to avoid the captive's sword and then took a chance to grab his head with her slender hands. Making use of his forward momentum, she slightly twisted his head, and the captive collapsed suddenly, looking as if all his bones were removed. Zero turned around to look at the 2 remaining captives and said, "Now, it's your turn." Chapter 311, Common People Fight Against Unearthly Power, Part 1. Having seen what had happened, a remaining captive immediately turned around to escape, which disappointed Zero. She transformed into a beam of dim light and entered the captive. He stopped running and rolled his eyes at once. It was not the first time for Maine to witness this uncanny ability, but every time he saw it, he could not help but get cold feet. As the dim light shone out of the captive's body, his image was twisted and distorted. In the end, he changed into Zero. Maine could tell that this was not possessing or killing, but as for what had happened exactly in the process, he thought that only the Pope and those people who had experienced it had a clear idea. Zero took a deep breath and then walked to the last captive. At the age of 14 or 15, he was the youngest among all the 3 captives. With the panic in his clear eyes, this boy clearly could not believe what he had seen. "Now, you're all alone, Al," Zero whispered. Hearing this, the boy who was trying to pick up the bent blade with trembling hands was stunned. Why? Deities have told me everything. You're a farmer's child living in the suburbs, but the king of Wolfheart forced all the people in your village to move into the city to repair the city wall, make military supplies and deliver food for the army. They didn't treat a young boy like you differently. They grabbed you for military service in the scouts team and then abandoned you to your fate. She reached out her hand to touch his cheek. The best evidence of this is the fact that you weren't allowed into the city by the guards the first time you went back to report. You delivered to them the information about our actions, but the captain of the guards just asked you to leave and to follow us again, after hearing your report, right? Aye. He opened his mouth but failed to say anything. They would never let you in, because all the people in your family, your parents and brothers, were dead at that time. They were just like you, being enslaved and abandoned by the king. If the guards let you in, the whole scouts team would know those bad, disgusting deeds. When your father was mending a breach in the city wall, he fell down from it and died. Your mother went to the supervision team to ask for a reason, but only received a flogging punishment. Because of this, now her life is hung by a thread. Without deities, this world will remain to be evil and ugly. Are you sure you still want to serve such a lord? Zero said. Al's eyes widened in shock. Unable to resist the grief, he cried, "It's impossible. You're lying." "Deities never lie," the pure witch shook her head. "You know in the bottom of your heart that what I said is true. You know that your tragedy is caused by the fact that the noble would never regard you as equals and would treat you like their livestock. We, the Church, however, want to end this kind of tragedies and build a new world which is under the supervision and protection of deities." Al fell heavily onto his knees and dropped his head, wailing. What should I do?" "Follow your own heart. Only deities can make a decision." The boy sobbed. "I was wrong. I'll tell you everything I know. I'll do anything as long as I can save my mother." "Good boy." Zero patted his head. She took a plant which was full of slender leaves out of her pocket and handed it to him. "Eat this and have a good sleep first. It'll stabilize your emotions." She tore off half a leaf and chewed it in her mouth. "Eat it just like me. When we occupy Wolfheart City tomorrow, you'll probably meet your mother again." Maine frowned when he recognized the plant. It was sleeping fern used to make dreamland water. It did no harm to a witch, but could violently poison and kill a common person. Only Coltsfoot could neutralize its toxicity. As he expected, quickly after the young boy ate it, his face turned green. He gripped his own throat and looked at the smiling pure witch in disbelief. He hissed and scratched his skin with his nails. Soon his blood spilled out, covering his neck. After struggling for nearly 7 minutes, he went limp and stopped breathing. "It's a pity that deities don't forgive your sins." Zero smiled and walked to the Archbishop. She bowed and said, "Your Eminence, what do you think of this trial? Did I act like Her Eminence Heather? Why did you delude him to eat sleeping ferns?" Maine asked in a deep voice. "If it was Heather, we would get one more devout believer instead of a dead body. Why did you put this lost sheep that you brought back to death? If his family members did die as what I've said, he'll become a pious believer. Unfortunately, I didn't know what happened to them. I made up the story to deceive him." Zero shrugged, showing no emotion. Once he found out the truth, it wouldn't be a good thing for the Church. "That's why I must kill him. Trust me." I serve the church wholeheartedly. If you do, you should wait for orders inside your tent. Maine retorted inwardly. Not wanting to get involved in this trial thing any longer, he turned his head and said, "We're about to attack. You two should get ready at once. According to our plan, the King of Wolfheart and the Queen of Clearwater must die, Your Eminence." The pure witch interrupted with a smile. "I may not be able to complete such a task alone, but now that Isabella is here, none of them can escape from the kingdom of Wolfheart." Woo, woo. The attacking horn resounded to the skies. Under black clouds, the church launched the second siege battle in the rustling autumn wind. Over 1,000 meters away from the city, the spear holders of the siege beasts started to shine with magic power. When they shone like the glaring sun, a spear was thrown out with a deafening roar, looking as if it were hurled out by a giant. It flew toward the city wall at such a high speed that the human eyes were unable to capture it. After traveling a long distance, the iron spear still maintained its momentum. It smashed into the snowstone city wall and continued to knock down the militia soldiers hiding behind it. 3 rounds of spear shooting shattered the city gate and heavily damaged the wall area near it. Working at a similar speed to a catapult, the demon's siege weapons could shoot several times farther than the man-made armament. As the city's defending soldiers were unable to see the moving trails of the extremely fast spears, they had no idea where they were going to attack. Given that, they did not know how to fight back, either. Before the church's army came to the city, its outer defense line was already teetering on the brink of collapse. In a sudden, an earth-shattering boom reverberated somewhere behind the city wall. A huge fireball shot up into the sky. All the soldiers nearby felt the vibration under their feet, and then the section of wall tumbled down in the fire and black smoke, leaving a gap in this mottled city wall. Hearing the quick sounds of the horn, Judgment Army and God's Punishment Army started to charge toward the city wall. They looked like golden and red waves, remorselessly swamping all the enemies who dare to stand in front of them. Being only flesh and blood, the defenders of Wolfheart now had to fight against those unearthly soldiers. Chapter 312, Common People Fight Against Unearthly Power, Part 2. Common people can't compete with demons. That's why the church creates God's Punishment Army, Isabella thought. God's punishment warriors were extremely powerful, without pain or fear, making the best soldiers to fight against demons. They could not act independently, but this was not necessarily a shortcoming during battles. It was impossible for the city's garrison formed by common people to stop such a strong troop. Especially now, without the city wall's protection, they could never defeat the church's elite soldiers in close combats. The Golden Waves arrived at the gate of Wolfheart City. Judgment warriors dressed in golden started an intense fight against the assembled garrison. Among the gold waves, there were some red spots which were God's punishment warriors wearing red clothes. They walked from the collapsed section up to the top of the wall as easily as on the flat ground and began to kill the soldiers of Wolfheart, who were still trying to hold their position in the front line. Isabella turned around and asked Zero, "Are we going to help them?" Zero yawned and answered, "No, my magic power is limited. I've got to leave it to the important enemies." Isabella twitched her lips, saying, "Come on, you can fight with swords, hammers or crossbows. They can't defeat you anyway." Zero shook her head and said, "With or without me, our army will easily win the battle. I don't want to do such a meaningless thing." "Well..." Isabella decided to change the subject. "Why did you do that?" "What?" "Seeing you fool with the boy captive, the archbishop got a really stiff face." Isabella seemed a little worried. "He's probably the next pope and he doesn't seem to like this kind of trials. Aren't you worried he'll give you a hard time? Lord Maine may be angry seeing that." "That's because he's not yet become the pope." Zero seemed to pay no heed to Isabella's advice and continued, "As soon as he steps into the library on the top floor of Pivotal Secret Temple, he'll understand that it's the only way to please the deities." "What way?" "Fooling." Zero smoothed her snow-white hair blown into a mess by the wind. "Deities will never come to this world, nor will them protect the people in this world. Instead, they set an imaginary goal for us, forcing us to strive for it and long for it. Isn't this just like my trial game? At least, I gave the captives a clear goal, but deities gave us nothing. They even don't promise that the goal they set for us is real, or all of this thing is just our crazy, twisted imagination. No matter what, we're still willing to risk everything. TSK, this is really fooling. What's Zero talking about? How come I can't understand a word she's saying? Isabella was confused and asked with a frown, "Have you been to the library?" "Not yet," Zero shrugged and explained, "His Holiness O'Brien told me these things. He's no magic power and is getting near to the end of his life. It's said that a common people tends to review all his life experiences in head and find someone to talk to, as his life moves to its end. The Pope even plans to let me absorb him before he dies." "You can't," Zero interrupted. "I won't, of course. It'll enrage Lord Maine. Relax, I know what I can't do." She smiled meaningfully and added, "But there's another possibility. What if the Pope defeat me? When that happens, I'll lose my body to him." "I don't think so. If you lose, nothing will happen, I suppose." Isabella heaved a sigh, thinking that Zero was indeed a strange person. She guessed that Zero's weirdness might have something to do with her ability. By absorbing so many people, she had experienced all kinds of feelings in this world. As a result, she was seldom keen on one thing, and all she did was for fun, unusual fun. Isabella moved her eyes back to the battlefield. Some drugged men suddenly appeared on top of the city wall, dashing toward God's punishment army. Most of them got pierced through by God's punishment warriors' spears. Only a few made close to their target. At this moment, here came another explosion noise. Flying dust and smoke enveloped the gap area at once. Isabella thought, this is probably the alchemical weapon they've seen in the previous siege battle. It may be good enough to suppress demonic beasts, but will never stop God's punishment army. Without pills, those people could hardly get close to God's punishment warriors. At the gate area, the golden waves were blocked, too. A large fire flared up at the gate, stopping the judgment warriors outside from entering the city. Some warriors got inflamed in the fire. They immediately rolled on the ground, but still failed to put out the fire on their bodies. Isabella said, "Oh, it seems some big shots have come to the gate." The density of God's stones of retaliation increases several times, and there are 2 high-quality stones. "So, let's go to the battlefield," Zero stretched her body and said. "But they're not the King of Wolfheart and the Queen of Clearwater." Isabella glanced at the inner city area and continued, "The best stones are still in the castle. Are you sure you're going to join the fight now? Isn't the army in trouble? A bitter victory is completely different from an easy victory. I've got to reduce loss for His Holiness O'Brien." Zero tilted her head and with a serious look on her face she added, "As what I said before, I serve the church wholeheartedly." Wolfheart's city outer defense line finally collapsed in the afternoon. God's punishment warriors controlled the gap in the city wall, and Judgment Army swept into the streets of the city to eliminate the remaining defenders of Wolfheart. Our targets started to move. Isabella looked at the castle. They seemed to head for the dock on the inland river. The 2 big shots who came to the gate to organize resistance turned out to be sons of the King of Wolfheart. Zero absorbed both of them and confirmed Isabella's speculation by reading their memories. The 2 people wearing best quality God stones were the King of Wolfheart and the Queen of Clearwater. Besides, Zero and Isabella also killed an exotically dressed fallen witch. Right after her death, the number of drugged militia fighters who dared to fight against God's punishment warriors decreased dramatically. They probably want to leave by boat. "Let's go to fulfill the mission that His Holiness gave to us," Zero smiled and said. The King of Wolfheart and the Queen of Clearwater acted with caution. They had changed routes several times on their way to the dock. When they arrived at the dock, they boarded a small, single-masted merchant ship instead of a great black sail ship. No matter how hard they had tried to cover their tracks, their each and every move had been captured by Isabella. As soon as they stepped on the deck of the small ship followed by a score of guards, the pure witches outflanked them on both sides of the ship. The guards sensed danger at once. Without a word, they simultaneously drew out their swords, jumped off the ship and lunged at the witches. Zero fought with skills and ease. She snatched a long sword from a guard with empty hands and used it to fight against the swordsman. She precisely controlled her strength and used the sword to poke, strike, chop or block. She was so dexterous and quick in action that none of the guards could predict her next move. Each of her movements was well-timed and proper-angled, and every strike of hers killed a guard. Soon, a dozen of guards fell down, dead. Seeing this, the King of Wolfheart drew out his sword, ready to fight till death. "Isabella!" Zero shouted. "Got it." Isabella summoned her magic power and formed around herself a lightless realm which could only be seen by eye of magic. She was able to see black zones created by different god stones of retaliation, where magic power effects would be eliminated. Those black zones were slightly vibrating at different rates, looking like rippled water surfaces. She made her own dark zone vibrate at the same rate as that one around the king did, and then connected her zone to the king's. The ripples of her zone quickly cancelled out that of the king's zone, leaving both zones flat and smooth. At this moment, Zero instantly transformed into a beam of dim light and entered the King of Wolfheart. Seeing the King of Wolfheart twist and change into the pure witch, the Queen of Clearwater was unable to conceal her shock any longer. Why can you use magic power faced with God's stones of retaliation? Because God's stones don't work the way you think them do, but you don't need to know this, as your end is coming soon, Isabella replied, and then stopped the vibration of Garcia Wimbledon's black zone. Before her voice faded away, Zero darted at Garcia. Chapter 313, Battle of Souls. I haven't felt such warm sunshine for a long time. Garcia stood in a garden and took a deep breath. She smelled rosemary in the gentle breeze. Even with her eyes closed, she knew that she was not in the kingdom of Everwinter. That place had nothing except cold winds, frozen soil and no scent coltsfoot, and the backyard of the castle was constantly filled with stench from the sausage and the meat hung up to dry. This place was obviously not her port of Clearwater either. Winds here were not humid or salty, and she could not hear any sound of sea waves washing up on the beach. It must be the backyard of the Palace of Grey Castle, she thought. However, when she opened her eyes, she found it was somehow different from the place she remembered. Sitting by the central flower bed, she touched the rough stone bricks. Once in her childhood, when she had been playing hide-and-seek here, she had stumbled over some brick and broken her forehead, blood spilling out to cover her whole face. She remembered that her father had already had the bricks replaced by smooth cobbles to prevent similar accidents from happening again, but after that she had been unable to hide herself here anymore. She also remembered that the moment she had fallen, Gerald and Timothy had been there, too. They had been scared seeing what had happened to their sister. In order to comfort her, they had taken turns to imitate the way she had fallen and had deliberately hit their heads onto the bricks beside the flower bed. Because of these stupid actions, they had been beaten by father afterwards. Garcia had thought that she had already forgotten this experience, like a secret deeply buried under a tree. However, coming back to this place revived her memories at once. When this experience was dug out, she found that she could still clearly recall every detail of it. She felt as if she traveled back to her childhood. In a sudden, she heard a strange voice coming from behind. "So, this is your world. It's a nice place for you to sleep forever." Following the soft, dreamlike voice, Garcia turned around and saw a woman dressed in white step out from the back of the flower bed. She had long white hair, a perfect face and a pair of light red eyes, looking like an angel. The Queen of Clearwater pulled her face and said, "You're the church's witch." "My name is Zero. It's not appropriate to call me a witch." "I'm a pure witch, different from those fallen ones," the woman said with a slight smile. Garcia said coldly, "Pure witch? You're just the church's plaything. What's this trick? Is this scene a mirage you create? Is this your ability?" She paused to pick up a stone and squeezed it in her hand. "It's not real. You can't deceive me." The queen's roar reached far, but nothing changed after that. The stone did not break. Instead, its hard edges grazed her hand. When she released the stone, she could still feel the pain in her hand clearly. "Well, apparently, you're not ignorant of witches' abilities. It's much easier for me to explain." Zero lifted her dress a little and slightly bowed. "Welcome to the world of consciousness. I call it Soul Battlefield. We're going to fight against each other here. The winner gets everything, and the loser loses everything, just as the Oracle in the Holy Book says." "Soul Battlefield?" Garcia was stunned and suddenly felt a sharp pain in her chest. Before she had noticed, Zero had conjured a spear from nowhere and thrust it into her chest, making her feel hard to breathe. She opened her mouth, trying to shout, but failed to make any sound. At this moment, Zero turned the barrel of the spear and pulled it out, let Garcia's blood gush out and splash on her body. The queen knelt down, trying to cover the wound with trembling hands, but the massive loss of blood quickly made her black out. The next moment, Garcia found herself intact and standing in the same place, and the pure witch was leaning on her erected long spear and watching her from a distance, looking as if she had never left that place. Garcia panted heavily, thinking, what happened just now? Is it just an illusion? However, when she lowered her head, she saw a pool of blood at her feet. This is the rule, but consciousness isn't immortal. Zero spread her hands. The pain of each death is real to you. It'll consume your willpower and strength. When you can't bear it anymore, the real long sleep will befall you. She continued to explain in a gentle voice, after each death, your body will be restored to its original state. Most people were able to withstand 3 to 4 times at most, but some strong-willed people I've seen could survive 7 to 8 or even more times. I'm looking forward to seeing how many you can take, but I'll understand if you decide to give up. After all, continuous deaths are an unbearable torment even for me. It's not a cowardly choice to quit this battle, especially when you're doomed." With these words, she threw away her spear and drew out a long sword from her back. She jumped up, flying toward Garcia with the sword in hand. Garcia's eyes were widened in shock. It's impossible for the pure witch to hide such a big weapon in her white dress, so they must be conjured from the air? In a sudden, some words that the witch had said flashed upon her mind. "So, this is your world. I call it the soul battlefield. Consciousness isn't immortal, it's real to you." The sword struck down, but hit on a large iron shield, instead of cutting Queen of Clearwater in half. The rebound force was so strong that Zero could hardly hold the handle of the sword. After a loud crash, the sword flew out of her hand, and she involuntarily moved backward for quite a long distance. Meanwhile, Garcia was also knocked down by the impact. "I'm doomed," the queen grated her teeth and sneered. "You said that this is my world, did you?" She rolled to get up and conjured a hand crossbow. When she was shooting at Zero with it, a crucifix rose behind the witch to trap her. With bolt shot into her tummy, the pure witch revealed a look of suffering on her face. She panted for a while and then said slowly, I'm really surprised. Ahem, usually it's hard for a person to perceive the rule of this world, let alone motivating his consciousness to fight back. Queen of Clearwater, you're definitely a tough opponent even for Lord Maine. Thanks for the compliment." Garcia picked up the spear on the ground. "If you didn't talk so much crap, I wouldn't realize the wonders of this world so quickly. Well, next, how many holes should I pierce your body?" The pure witch smiled bitterly, saying, "It's up to you." When Garcia thrust the spear into Zero for the 10th time, the witch finally died. The queen intentionally avoided the vital parts by starting from her limbs and tummy. In the beginning, Zero had given out sad shrills, but then she had gradually quieted down in the process. "Now, this witch will come back to life, but I won't lose. This is the palace of the Kingdom of Grey Castle, my world. I can conjure anything here according to my will," Garcia thought. Soon, as a beam of white light shone through Zero's body, all her wounds were gone. She opened her light red eyes again. Garcia raised the spear, ready to kill the witch one more time. However, out of her expectation, Zero easily got rid of the ropes that tied her to the crucifix. She kicked the spear away and came close to Garcia. Before the queen realized, she lifted her hand and cut. Garcia lost all her feelings at once. In front of Zero, who had nothing in her hand, a headless body feebly fell to the ground. How is this possible? After a dozen seconds, Queen of Clearwater came back to life again. She covered her neck with her hands and staggered backward in fright, thinking, did the witch cut my head off with just her hand? She looked at the broken hemp ropes on the crucifix and then at the blood on her own hands, convincing herself that what had happened was true. Zero smiled and said, if you don't understand the rule of the consciousness world, how can I get a real fight? You look confused. Are you wondering how did I get rid of the ropes which were as thick as a finger? The answer is simple. As I told you, in this world, the winner takes all. Among all the people I've absorbed, there are some supremely powerful witches. They're strong, fast, and not afraid of God's stone of retaliation. Maybe you've never heard of them before. The church calls them extraordinaries. Zero opened her arms, saying, you can't defeat me by conventional means. If you want to survive, you've got to try harder. Now, it's my turn. Chapter 3:14, Total Annihilation. This was the first time for Garcia to witness what an extraordinary could do. The weapon in her hand was just an ordinary sword, but its strikes were unbelievably heavy and powerful. After resisting several such strikes with her shield in hand, Garcia was unable to lift up her arm anymore. At this moment, Zero poked the sword from the ground to the sky to break her chin. When she recovered this time, she decisively abandoned this strategy of passive defense and conjured a ballista in front of her. She pulled the trigger to shoot several jars of black water of the Styx's river instead of iron spears. Zero struck to break the earthen jars and got soaked in the black water downpour. The fire crystals immersed in the jars fell out and covered all over her body. They started to fume and burn as soon as they contacted with the air, turning the pure witch into a pillar of fire. When Zero came back to life again and begun to move at a superhuman speed around the flower bed, Garcia's trick could not work anymore. Now that she was unable to aim her ballista at the fast-moving witch, she tried to hinder her movement by rising a stone wall and steel bars covered with sharp thorns in the garden. She changed all the flower pots into explosives filled with snow powder and sometimes created sinkholes in the ground to trap the witch. By doing all these things, Garcia had killed Zero for several times. Gradually, her breath was getting labored and heavy and beads of sweat were sliding down from her forehead. Suffering from frequent dizzy spells, she felt as if she were standing on a shaky ground. Well done. Zero recovered and clapped her hands, instead of taking this chance to launch an attack. You've really impressed me a lot by fighting till now. But I forgot to tell you something. In this world of consciousness, you can change your world according to your will as you did just now, but it consumes much more energy than conjuring things out of the air. It feels like recovering from a death. You must feel weak and tired now, and the next time, you may fall asleep forever. It's better than stretching out my neck for your sword. Garcia panted and continued, you seem to forget about the screams you made when you were burnt by the fire crystals. How many times have you died? 3 or 4? I don't think you'll hold on any longer than I do. Zero remained speechless for a while and said, since I became a pure witch of the church, I've been well trained in literacy, basic knowledge, and combat skills. To enhance my ability, the church even fed judgment warriors to me. Knowing that they would sacrifice themselves, those warriors still came into Soul Battlefield without hesitation. In this world of consciousness, they fought till death just to improve my skills, and then were absorbed by me voluntarily, giving me all their feelings and experiences. Garcia guessed that Zero might be trying to delay the time, but she did not interrupt the witch, as she also needed some rest now. I've swallowed an extraordinary. Her power filled me with awe. I nearly lost in that battle of souls, but in the end I managed to defeat her with the demon's weapon and got all the things she had. Due to the differences in magic types, I can't change into an extraordinary, or get the ability of any other which I absorbed, but it's not a problem for me in this world of consciousness. By absorbing countless people in the past 200 years, I've become so strong that no one can threaten me now, and in this way, I've experienced all kinds of pains, happiness, sorrows and pleasures of this world. Zero paused for a while. And all kinds of deaths. What is your point? Garcia asked with a frown. Zero calmly replied, to show you the gap between you and me. With all the souls in me, I've got extraordinary willpower. To make it more clear, if you judge one's willpower by the death time she can bear, you'll see that I can bear at least 100 times of death. Garcia sneered. Well, I'll help you verifying it. Meanwhile, however, her heart sank. She could tell that Zero was not bluffing about it. Having witnessed the witch easily kill the guards at the dock, the queen had to admit that she did demonstrate combat skills that were not consistent with her age. Given that, I've got to use a more powerful weapon to fight against her. Come on, I have to be quick. What weapon can easily kill an experienced extraordinary? Zero seemed to be able to read through Garcia's mind and said, the battle of souls isn't about imagination. You can't make yourself impervious to blades and spears or summon some legendary weapon of destructive power out of the air. In this world, you create weapons to fight with based on your own knowledge and experiences instead of imagination. You can't summon those things that you don't understand. Garcia sneered. I'll spread snow powder all over the garden. When that happens, you can't escape anymore, and I may end up dead, too. However, at least, in this way, I can destroy you along with myself. Zero looked at the queen with pity, saying, what a meaningless result you strive for. In this case, I'll show you the real strength of the church. Several beams of red light shone behind Zero and then cohered as ferocious-looking chariots. The giant chariots even crushed the wall of the garden. On the top of each chariot, 2 sharp iron spears stuck out, reminding Garcia of what a guard of the King of Wolfheart had reported. He had said that the church had been using some strange spear throwers to attack the city wall and that those weapons which he had never seen before had turned to be far stronger and shot much farther than the other weapons of their type. Garcia wondered whether these giant weapons in front of her were the strange spear throwers mentioned by the guard. At this moment, she heard a zoom noise. A thick spear broke through the barriers raised by Garcia and easily tore her in half, sending her body parts flying backward. Before she lost consciousness this time, she could even see her own inner organs and blood spill all over the ground. She died and recovered again and again, while the chariots kept shooting long spears at her. In this process, she could hardly get a chance to create snow powder to kill both her enemy and herself. Constant tearing pains started to make her out of consciousness. Right at the moment, the ground began to tremble and the sky started to crack. Lightning flashed, thunder rumbled, and a large fire broke out in the garden. A strong will only delay your failure. It won't change the result. Zero closed her eyes. You've struggled for long enough. Now, rest in peace. After these words, the whole world collapsed. Is it over? Isabella twitched her mouth. Should not it be completed instantly? I saw you change back into yourself a long time ago, but you've not said even a word. I thought you failed. Zero opened her eyes and said, in her memory, I found something interesting. Some of her ideas amazed me. Isabella asked with a casual air, oh? Is there anything in the world still able to surprise you? What about that strange alchemy powder? Did you find it? Yes, the alchemists call it snow powder, made from common raw materials in their workshops. Its composition is quite simple. Good, let's hurry back to Holy City to report to His Holiness O'Brien. Isabella heaved a sigh of relief. The battle here will last for at least 3 or 4 days, but without the leaders and the witch, the remaining troops can't stop God's punishment army now. Let's go, Zero nodded and said. Wait. Isabella stopped her. What? Isabella looked at Zero carefully and then shook her head, saying, no, nothing. However, she could not help but think, is it an illusion? She looks the same as before, but why did I feel that there was something different in her light red eyes? Perhaps I'm just thinking too much. Chapter 3:15, A Celebration Party. Roland held a splendid celebration party in the hall of his castle in border town. Besides the witches, all high officials of City Hall and the First Army attended it, including noblemen such as Bear of Mons and Carter Lannis and civilians like Iron Axe and Kyle Seachy. Roland had tried every possible way to persuade Kyle to come to this, in his words, meaningless banquet. In order to share his happiness with his subjects, the prince gave a public speech and ordered his kitchen to bake a large sum of white bread with the left refined starch for the people of the town. Today, everyone who showed his or her ID card to City Hall could get one piece of this delicious bread there. In this way, most people of the town knew the victory before the return of the First Army. They might not understand the purpose and significance of this expedition, but as long as they could get free bread, it was a day worth celebrating. This was the first time for Roland to organize an elegant banquet, following the fashion trend of the king's city. It was similar to a buffet in the modern times. Instead of serving chunks of grilled or stewed meat, all the food was diced or sliced and delivered to the table in white plates. Besides the dishes, different sauces were placed in a big bowl for the guests to use according to their preference. He walked toward Anna, with 2 glasses of fruit wine in hands. "Welcome back. Thank you for your hard work." Anna took a glass of wine, saying, "You've already thanked me at the dock." "It's my pleasure." When they clinked glasses, Roland saw the happiness and sweetness in the girl's eyes. He resisted the urge to hold her on the spot and then toasted to the other witches. "What about me?" shouted Lightning. "You shall have some, too." Roland beckoned to a waiter and took a glass of cider for her. "Thank you for your hard work." "I want white liquor," the little girl looked up and said. All right, but only 1 glass of it." After a little thought, Roland agreed to her request. He thought that if he continued to refuse her plea like this curious little girl would follow Nightingale's example and sneak into the kitchen to steal liquor for herself. "Yes." The moment Roland handed her a glass of low-alcohol white liquor with ice cubes, the little girl suddenly came up and kissed his cheek. "Ahem. Is this a social etiquette of the fjords again?" "Yes, my dad told me that." Lightning nodded vigorously. The witches of the town, who had seen similar things happen before, did not seem to heed this action, but Sylvie and all the other sleeping island witches stared at this in surprise. After that, they all looked at Roland with accusing looks in their eyes, seriously doubting this strange fjord's etiquette of kissing the lord during a celebration party. Feeling quite awkward, the prince turned his head aside to avoid their eyes. After that, he moved to toast to his officials. When he came to Chief Alchemist Kyle Seachy, he leaned toward him and whispered, "Your Highness, I've read intermediate chemistry twice, but still can't understand many parts of it. It expounds microcosmic composition of substances and involves lots of physics knowledge. You have to read it together with another book to get a clear idea. I suggest that you read elementary physics before you read the incomplete chemistry book. In this way, you can find answers for many of your questions," Roland explained. "That's what I intended to do, but..." He hesitated. "Your Highness, why do the covers of the ancient books have different colors? Do the colors suggest anything?" "Well," Roland continued after a little thought, "the colors represent different levels and different degrees of difficulty." With a thoughtful expression on his face, Kyle said, "I see. The covers change from green to purple, and the deeper the color is, the more difficult the content of the book will be. Given that, the cover of advanced chemistry must be black, right?" "No, it's orange." "Ah." Kyle was greatly surprised. "Why?" Roland smiled and said, "Who knows?" Halfway through the banquet, the prince walked out of the hall and came to the castle terrace. In the evening breeze, he felt a touch of coolness and then realized that half of the autumn had already passed, and before long the months of demons would bring a long, cold winter to the whole western region. He was happy to have witnessed many good changes of the town in this year. After the deals with Margaret's Chamber of Commerce, the town was awash in liquidity. Most of those gold royals were distributed to the subjects as wages, except for some used to buy food and goods. A recent survey conducted by the convenience market showed remarkable sales increases in all kinds of goods of the market, especially those goods which could significantly increase life quality, such as steaks and eggs. No doubt, the statistics suggested that the living standard of the people was improved, especially that of the locals. Now that they had free brand new houses and much higher incomes, they started to buy good food for daily meals, which they had only been able to enjoy in festivals in the past. As to the newcomers of the town, they were still saving money to buy houses. Roland believed that when they settled down, the market would see a new sales peak. What did the people need? In some era, they would be grateful and loyal to their lord, as long as they could eat and drink well. Just like in this era, most people were easy to be content. Your Highness, be careful not to catch cold. Nightingale appeared behind him with a thin leather coat in her hand. She tossed it to Roland and then took out a piece of dried fish. She stood beside him, asking, "What are you doing here?" "Nothing." He smiled and put on the coat. "I just wanted to see my domain in a sudden. The town still seems bustling." Nightingale pointed to the square lit up by firelight. "It's getting late now, but there are still so many people outside. Because tonight is the first night of the new drama Dawn. Roland smiled. "It's the first show after the troupe comes back here. The audience has waited for several months. They just can't wait any longer to see Miss May and Miss Irene again." He suddenly thought of the fact that Miss May would soon become Miss May Ronnies. To his great surprise, his chief knight had quickly won the affection of Star of the Western region. He had been dumbfounded for a long while when Carter told him about it with an expression of absolute honesty. By tradition, a chief knight's marriage needed his lord's approval. As Carter's lord, Roland would never object to such a happy thing. Carter and May's wedding would be held after the months of demons this year, on the same day of the city-building announcement of Border Town. Nightingale was also moved by the lively scene, saying, "When I sneaked into the town for the first time, it was still a dull, backward place, but now I can feel the joy of the people even when I'm standing inside the castle. The people's life is getting better day by day." Roland looked up at the cloudless, starry night sky, thinking that he still had a lot of things to do, such as expanding education, establishing public healthcare system, strengthening cultural construction, encouraging births, etc. All these things would thrive his western region and give him enough strength to unify the kingdom of Grey Castle. What about us? Nightingale tilted her head and asked, with a crafty look in her eyes. "You'll be getting better, too." Roland patted her head. "I promise." Chapter 316, The Second Exploration into the Stone Tower. Having seen the prince leave the hall, Lightning drew Maggie into a corner. "Coo?" Maggie wore her hair down. The long white hair which almost touched the ground made her look like a ghost when she was moving. She parted the hair covering her face and revealed a bulging face. Half of a pork gristle still stuck out of her mouth. Lightning whispered, "I find an interesting place in Misty Forest. I'll go to explore it tomorrow. Are you going with me?" "Coo." Maggie swallowed the food in her mouth and nodded repeatedly. "Yes, what do I need to prepare?" "The three-piece suit for exploration." Realizing that she had used some Roland-style strange words just now, Lightning corrected herself by saying, "No, I mean the three most frequently used things in exploration: flint, solid food, and dagger. It's not very far away. We only need to bring food enough for one day. Don't fill all your bag with food like the last time." "Got it, Coo," Maggie patted her chest and said. When she was about to leave, Lightning stopped her. She said to Maggie, "Remember, this is our secret. Don't tell anyone else. We'll set out tomorrow morning." Seeing her hurriedly heading for the dining table, Lightning twitched her lips and started to think about the plan for tomorrow's exploration. Despite the fact that she had successfully dropped the bomb for His Highness, recently when she was flying she found that something seemed to hinder her movement and decrease her agility. Every time when she sped up, she felt as if she were chased by a demon. She believed this psychological obstacle was caused by the dreadful experience of her precious exploration into the stone tower. She had panicked and turned around to flee as quickly as possible when seeing the menacing bulk at the entrance of the basement. This fear had not only made her lose her cool on the spot but also affected her confidence in being an explorer. The thing you have to fear isn't fear itself, but fearing the unknown. If you want to overcome it, you must get close to it first. Lightning repeated to herself what her father had taught her. Knowing that tomorrow she might confront real dangers, she still made up her mind to be brave and keep moving forward. She knew that if she failed to overcome her fear this time, she would no longer fly freely. This was the reason for her decision to act without Roland's authorization. In accordance with the prince's plan, the exploration of the stone tower was scheduled after the months of demons, but at that time, accompanied by all the other witches and the First Army soldiers, she thought she would not force herself to overcome her fear. It could hardly be called her exploration if she was only able to get close to that dreadful place with so many people. She was clear that His Highness might reproach her and punish her by stopping offering her ice creams for this unauthorized action, and the Sisters of the Witch Union might worry about her, but she still determined to go. As the daughter of the greatest explorer of the fjords, Lightning could not accept herself as a coward. She must be well prepared for this upcoming exploration. Compared with the ill-prepared one several months ago, this time she was equipped with a revolver, a gift from the prince, and she had a better understanding of demons and her friend Maggie's help. It's really good that Maggie agreed to join me. Even if she failed to fright away demons, if any, in her demonic beast form, she could at least carry me and flew away in a dangerous situation. An explorer doesn't need a large troop to keep his courage up, but exploring with several reliable friends is totally acceptable, she thought. When the banquet ended, Lightning wrapped up all the sliced honey ham she had collected and put it in a cloth bag, and then she put in her gun, her torch and her water bag. She got some of her confidence back after the success of the bombing mission, and felt braver after getting encouragement from the prince and kissing his face, which had a little stubble. As the saying went, struck while the iron was hot. After such a nice day, tomorrow was the best time for her to start the exploration. Early in the next morning, when she flew up to the top of the castle, Maggie was already perching on the top of the wall, waiting for her. "Check your pack. I take all the things you said." Maggie transformed back into a girl and opened her crossbody bag for Lightning to check. This time, Maggie only took half a bag's food, a dagger and a flint. "Well, I can let you pass this time. Let's go." Lightning flew with the pigeon toward Misty Forest. As she had recalled this route many times in her head, she could fly in the right direction even with her eyes closed. It was a little cloudy today, but it was much better than the dark and gloomy day when she had explored the tower for the first time. The land below was slowly moving backward. When she was approaching the area where the stone tower located, Lightning was getting increasingly nervous. Maggie asked, "Is the interesting place you mentioned last night a newly found eagle's nest?" Lightning shook her head and said, "No, it's much more interesting than that. Our destination today is an ancient monument, an over 400-year-old stone tower. As its basement hasn't collapsed yet, we may be able to find some ancient books in it recording information of that time." "Ancient books?" Maggie fluffed her wings. "It doesn't sound as fun as stealing eagle eggs, coo." Lightning explained, "An eagle nest has at most 2 or 3 eggs. You'll swallow them in a few bites. However, if we can find valuable ancient books there and bring them back to His Highness, he'll reward you with a basket of eggs. You can boil or steam them according to your preference. Even if you eat 3 of them each day, they'll be enough for you to enjoy for a long time." Hearing that, Maggie immediately cheered up. "Really? Let's hurry up to find ancient books." "Coo, coo." They finally saw the tower when it was almost noon. Half of a stone tower covered by vines and moss stood down there in the woods. Everything around it looked the same as several months ago. Lightning lowered herself to fly around it. After making sure that it was safe, she landed. "Is this the place?" asked the pigeon perching on her head. "Hush." Lightning put a finger in front of her lips to suggest Maggie be quiet. In this silent woods, even their speaking voices sounded quite loud. "Talk quietly, for some demons may be here, too." "Demons?" Maggie's tail erected in shock. "Waiting for me up there." "I'll get in and check first." Lightning pointed to the top of the broken tower and said in a very low voice. Stepping on the withered grass, she could clearly hear the rustle under her feet. She found that the plants had not grown back to cover the tower's entrance yet, and she saw the small cluster of vines she had cut off last time. She held her breath and entered the tower, following the route she remembered. Step by step, she was getting closer to the stairs in the center of the tower, which led to the basement. Now she could even hear her own heartbeat. Ignorance brings the fear. To overcome the fear, I've got to approach the unknown. The little girl kept encouraging herself in her heart. She lit a torch and walked down the stairs. Standing at the stair corner, she stretched her neck to peek. She saw that the collapsed wooden door was fragmented and no demon was at the entrance of the basement anymore. The profound darkness there looked like a bottomless open mouth of a man-eating monster. At this moment, she heard a weak but familiar voice coming out of the darkness. She involuntarily cringed at the sound, and all the hair on her body stood up at once. Feeling a desperate urge to escape, she clenched her teeth to suppress her fear and covered her mouth with her hands to prevent herself from crying out. She focused to listen again. This time, she heard it clearly. It repeated in the same tone. "Help me." Chapter 317, The Frozen Coffin. The voice gave Lightning goosebumps all over her body. All the horror stories that she had heard from some other explorers flashed upon her mind. No matter it was a devil crawling out of the abyss, a ghost bearing a grudge, or a lingering deathless, it would be an explorer's nightmare. A monster like that could kill a person simply by looking into his eyes and was good at creating illusions and deluding people. She was afraid that there was such a monster in this monument. Despite that her father Thunder had told her that those stories were just nonsense made up by the worst explorers, she still got cold feet at this moment. If it's not a monster, then what's it? Who can keep shouting inside in the same tone and at the same frequency for several months while being besieged by demons? She was faced with difficult choices. If it was a monster who had killed all the demons inside, going there would get herself killed by it, too. If it was someone who had been fighting against demons till now, there must be some demons that she never wanted to meet. She could hardly make a decision. After a little hesitation, she decided to fly back to discuss with Maggie first. Hearing what Lightning said about the situation inside, Maggie lifted her head, saying, "We can put out the torch and sneak in. This way, the demons can't see us." But we can't see them either." "I can transform into an owl." The pigeon rubbed the little girl's face. "By doing so, I can see everything in the darkness, coo." Lightning's eyes shone and agreed. "That's a good idea, but those legendary evil things have lived in the darkness for their whole life. They must be able to find prey in the dark. Otherwise, they've already starved to death. Didn't you say that those stories were just made up to scare people?" "It's not me, it's my dad," the little girl corrected. "It's all the same to me. Anyway, I've never heard of any immortal monster in the kingdom of Grey Castle. If they're really that powerful, they should not just exist in the fjords." A light shone in Maggie and the pigeon swiftly swelled into an owl, eyes filled with excitement. "I thought that you were quite interested in those stories." "Yes, a qualified explorer should never miss a chance to verify a story. I'm here to overcome my fear. I'll waste all my previous efforts if I escape now." After a moment of hesitation, Lightning decided to do as what Maggie had suggested. "But, wait. I'm here to overcome my fear, but what makes Maggie so interested in exploring this relic? Is it? Do you hurry to get inside because of the basket of eggs?" The owl blinked her round eyes at the little girl and then turned her head aside. Lightning came to the entrance of the basement again. She took several deep breaths and then crept into the deep darkness, tightly holding the revolver in hand. She felt much calmer this time with Maggie on her shoulder. The floor was wet, with puddles here and there. As this basement was located in a low-lying place, all the rain fell into the tower would end up flowing down here. Usually, a drainage system would be built for a basement to drain off the water, but after hundreds of years, most of the ditches here must have been blocked already. Maggie patted Lightning's head with a wing to suggest her be careful of the stairs in front of her. Lightning slowed down to fumble for the edge of the stair and then stepped down. After she took a turn, she saw some light in a sudden. This dim yellow light coming from the end of the stairs even made the floor gleam. She fixed her eyes on the floor for a moment and found that it was just shimmering sewage water down there. It submerged part of the door frame. Judging from that, she knew that the water inside the basement might at least be able to submerge her knees if she walked into it. Given that, she flew up and slowly moved to the door after she came to the stair parallel to the water's surface. She popped her head in and looked about. It was an incredibly large room behind the door, which was far more spacious than the space inside the tower above the ground. She did not see any burning torch, but some stones embedded in the wall were giving out yellow light, making it possible for her to roughly see everything inside. A raised stone stage stood in the center of the room with some standing figures on it. Judging from the big and muscular bodies and the shells on their backs, she was sure that they were demons. They had not yet noticed the girl and the owl. Instead, they were surrounding a blue stone cuboid with large shields and long spears in their hands. At this moment, the cries for help were getting more and more clear. They now sounded as if someone were talking right next to her ear. "Help me, help me." Lightning swallowed hard. "What should I do next?" "We go and save her right now," Maggie whispered in her ear. "What?" The little girl was startled. "But there are several demons inside, we can't beat them." She felt her hand holding the gun was sweaty now. "If Sister Nightingale was here, it would be all right, but I can't do this by myself." "Are they the demons you're talking about?" Maggie tilted her head and said, "They all seem to be dead, Coo." "What? Dead?" Maggie had flown toward the high stage before Lightning's voice faded away, leaving her to stand agape in the place. The little girl was so frightened at the moment that she even forgot to reach out her hand to grab Maggie back. When she finally began to take it in, Maggie had already flung herself to a demon. The little girl gnashed her teeth and followed the owl with a gun in her hand, repeating to herself the shooting tricks that Nightingale had taught her. Surprisingly, she saw the demon collapse in a sudden, like a weather-beaten rock. The owl smashed it in an instant simply by pecking at it. "What's going on?" Lightning landed beside Maggie and looked at the other three demons in surprise. Standing on the stage, she could clearly saw the cracks over all their bodies and broken spiderwebs between their legs. Through their ferocious masks, she saw their eyes and skins were pale and gray, showing no trace of life. Now she finally saw why Maggie said that, as in dim light the owl's vision was much better than that of hers. When she was about to relax, another thing suddenly caught her attention. Seen from afar, the big cuboid surrounded by the demons on this stage resembled a stone pillar, but it turned out to be transparent at close range. Inside it, stood a woman dressed in radiant garment. She closed her eyes and opened both of her hands. Her long blue hair flew backward, as if it were blown up by wind. "Is she a witch?" Maggie flew to the top of the crystal cuboid and pecked at it heavily, making loud and clear knocking sounds. However, it did not crack with the sounds. "I don't know," Lightning muttered. As soon as she put her hand on it, she felt a piercing coldness. It was obvious that this woman must have stayed in this stone coffin which was covered with a thick layer of dust for a very long time, but she looked as if she was still alive. With her eyebrows knitted tightly and her eyebrow tails raised, she seemed anxious and worried. "Help me." Again, Lightning heard the familiar voice coming from behind the crystal cuboid. Chapter 318, The Unknown. Roland scribbled quickly on a piece of paper. Several paragraphs streamed from the tip of his quill. He used to draft mechanical drawings with his computer all the time before coming to this world. Since he had rarely used pen, he had not anticipated that he would employ this ancient recording method again. Beside him lay 2 documents, both of which were the plans he was going to implement. One was about the massive production of sulfuric acid. Anna and Soraya had already produced the equipment required. The previous lead reaction vessel had been replaced by a more sturdy iron one, with an anti-corrosion coating on the inner side. The new vessel was 3 times larger than the trial version. Since he had yet to find a feasible way to collect and purify exhaust gases, mostly resulting from the combustion of sulfur and escaped nitrogen oxide, emitted during the manufacturing process, Roland decided to place the facilities on the south of the industrial zone, far away from Redwater River and the residential area. He also planned to build an enclosure outside the plant as well as a chimney to further increase the effective emission height. As the increase in the production of sulfuric acid would greatly enhance the production of nitric acid of a high concentration, the current top priority was to put the facilities to use. In the document, Roland instructed Kyle Seachy to pick some of his students to exclusively help with the mass production of sulfuric acid. At the same time, he also asked Barov to recruit some handymen from local residents for further assistance, so there would be around 100 laborers working in the first chemical plant. The second document was about establishing a public health care system. To be honest, Roland was not familiar with this area and naturally had no knowledge of modern medical science. Despite that, he still drafted a preliminary proposal that met the current requirements based on common sense. The first task for this department was to promote and advocate for a healthy lifestyle. For instance, water should be boiled before drinking, meat should be cooked before serving. The public should receive basic education related to health care, such as the cause of illnesses and their corresponding treatment, the differences between parasites and microorganisms, etc. With the improvement of his reputation, Roland believed that it was not hard to induce his subjects into doing what they were told. The hard part was actually to let them know the reason behind it. To tackle this problem, there should be experts responsible for public education. Subjects should be educated repeatedly before fully accepting the concept. It worked just like the slogans hung over the farmland. A one-time campaign was definitely not enough. The second task was to encourage birth rates. Since City Hall was short of staff, Roland did not want to specifically found a birth control department. He thus put this part under the healthcare sector. In this era, labor was always in deficiency. So, the more children subjects gave birth to, the better. With the help of Nana, complications that arose during the labor and delivery process would be largely reduced, and almost every woman could survive childbirth. Furthermore, to prevent child abandonment, especially of female babies, Roland made detailed policies regarding subsidies and punishment. For example, the subsidy for a female baby would be slightly higher than that for a male one, subsidies would be distributed regularly, there would be a fine or a sentence of imprisonment for child abandonment, etc. The last part was about fees. Apart from helping child deliveries, the hospital would charge a certain amount of fees according to how much magic power Nana consumed. This would not only reduce the burden placed on the little girl but would also lay a solid foundation for the establishment of future medical institutions. Roland had already known who the first superintendent of this department should be. It was Nana's father, Viscount Tigui Pine. The third document, which he was currently working on, was the most complicated and lengthiest of all 3, the city construction plan for Border Town. The proposal talked about the expansion of the town itself, as well as the merging with Longsong Stronghold. Roland would have to enact a series of laws to govern people in 2 locations and also create a judicial and policing system. He knew it was impossible to write a comprehensive, perfect plan just with the poor knowledge he had now. Therefore, he decided to first make a draft and further enhance the plan after discussing the details with Barov, the director of City Hall. Roland stretched himself after finishing the opening section. He then walked to the French window. It was a somber day. There was no sunshine in the morning. By the afternoon, the sky had been overspread by thick, sullen clouds. It appeared there was going to be a heavy rain soon. Chilly winds swept over the castle backyard while rustling the olive trees. Just then, Roland saw a dot darting in the castle's direction. "It's lightning." Nightingale's voice popped up behind him. "She probably went to Misty Forest to pick mushrooms again." Roland smiled. Normally when Lightning and Maggie did not need to scout around, they would just practice flying freely around the forest and have lunch outside. According to them, they would often come across some bird eggs and beehives. Sometimes, they would barbecue some little animals. Perhaps every explorer would eventually become a Bear Grylls. Although birdbeak mushrooms usually grew on trees, they always remind Roland of the story of a little girl who picked mushrooms. "Your Highness, you have a weird smile on your face." "Ahem, I just thought of an interesting story." "Do you want to hear it?" "Huh." Roland cleared his throat and began. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who liked to pick mushrooms while counting. Hang on. The dark shadow gradually drew closer. To Roland's surprise, it lowered and dashed straight to the French window instead of passing the castle. Roland hesitated for a moment before opening the window panes. Lightning darted into the room swiftly. Your Highness. I found a witch." No sooner had she landed than she exclaimed in excitement. "A witch?" Roland asked curiously, "Where?" "In the stone tower in Misty Forest." Lightning pointed to Maggie, who entered the office later. "She can be my witness." Coo. Maggie raised her head. "Stone tower?" Roland's brows knitted. "What happened exactly?" "Fill me in." Roland gasped after hearing Lightning's account. He could not believe the little girl would be so audacious as to again investigate the ancient relic where demons had once appeared accompanied by no one but a pigeon. What was more astonishing was that there was a witch down the relic. Of course, the witch could not be an ordinary one. At any rate, it was just incredible. What of the voice calling for help? "It's this. I found it on the table behind her." Lightning took out a palm-sized square iron box from her pocket. The box looked like a small vanity mirror at the first glance. When Roland opened its lid, however, he saw a red gemstone embedded in it. After turning on the switch beside the gemstone, an anxious lady's voice rang in his ear. "Help me." Roland shuddered. It was such a horrid voice that it appeared to be very close one moment and suddenly drifted far away the next. If he heard the same voice in a dim dungeon, he would not feel like staying there for even a single minute. "The gemstone has magic power." Nightingale revealed herself and commented with amazement. "I can see the swirl of magic power, although it was almost invisible. It looks just like the magic power of a witch." It seemed that the gemstone worked as a recorder running by magic power. Now the probability that the woman was a witch appeared to be even higher. "Are there any other stones like this in the basement of the stone tower?" Lightning shook her head. "I didn't look. Many rooms have been flooded. At that time, I just wanted to fly back and tell you the news as soon as possible. Don't do that again in the future, and particularly, don't go to dangerous places on your own." Roland patted Lightning on her head and then looked to Nightingale. "Summon all the members of the Witch Union and Iron Axe to my office. We probably have to carry out the relic searching plan earlier than we've planned to." Chapter 319, Snow and Fall. After everybody was here, Roland related the whole story again. A crystal coffin and an ancient relic, a damp but fully intact basement, a magic gemstone sending out a call for help, and a demon reducing to ashes. "What are your opinions on these matters?" Anna replied thoughtfully, "Are you saying she may be a witch? If she's still alive, we can probably learn more about what happened over 400 years ago from her." "She may not be a witch as well, or even not belong to this era," Scroll said hesitatively, "plus. She may not necessarily stand on our side," Leaf continued. Leaf's comment took Roland by surprise. If the relic was left by the church, the woman down there was very likely a member of the church. From her splendid dressing Lightning had described, she might even have been one of the senior executives in the church. If she was just an ordinary person, it would not be too big a problem. If she, unfortunately, was indeed a witch, then she might be a difficult person to deal with. Based on the battle between Ashes and Nightingale and the attack from Faceless, Roland concluded that there were no specific guidelines to grade a witch's fighting capacity. An extraordinary without a god's stone of retaliation might, in some cases, be defeated by an ordinary witch who had a unique ability. Likewise, a combating witch could also put herself in a difficult position if she was caught unprepared by an assistant witch. If the woman, by any chance, harbored malicious intent, nobody would then be able to guarantee that her ability would not pose a threat to the witch union, unless she was awakened under the influences of a god's stone of retaliation. Are you guys all crazy to debate whether she was on our side? Lily put her hand on her forehead. How could she possibly be alive? At any rate, she was a person living over 400 years ago. Witches have a short lifespan. Even a strong extraordinary can live no more than 100 years. You guys worry too much. In my opinion, she would probably shatter like that demon upon a gentle touch. Roland corrected her. Witches don't live long as because of demonic torture. Witches are physically stronger than normal people, so they should have a longer lifespan. Normal people live no more than 40 to 50 years. Lily let out a snort. Do you think everybody lives as long as a turtle? A life expectancy of 40 to 50 years was primarily caused by insufficient food and poor medical care. Once people's living standard improved, this number would increase by 20. Nevertheless, Roland thought Lily was somewhat right. Even if people did have a longer lifespan, they could not possibly live for 400 years. Even a turtle could not live that long. But she's alive indeed. Lightning retorted. You'll see once you get there. She's different from that dead demon. Her skin is radiant and her lips are plumped. Maggie. Coo. Lightning is right. Well, stop arguing, Wendy spoke up. Whether she's alive or dead, it's worth taking a look. Are you sure? Scroll frowned. If she's really a witch working for the church, we'll just put a god's stone of retaliation on her after she wakes up. That should do. Plus, we have Anna and Nightingale here. That shouldn't be a problem. Wendy said placidly, the key lies in the fact that she may know something about the battle over 400 years ago. We need to rescue her even just for that. The information about demons, which the church endeavored to cover up, was truly important for the town, and most likely it was not going to be a piece of good news. If they could learn it in advance, they would probably be able to gain a prevailing position in the future battle against the church. As both Anna and Nightingale held the same view, Scroll conceded unwillingly. An agreement had thus been reached among the Witch Union. What about the First Army? Roland looked at Iron Axe. I can dispatch 50 people at most, Iron Axe replied. Your Highness, you send out a few units to help City Hall to recruit refugees. There are currently 500 soldiers garrisoning the town approximately. Although Timothy received a god's punishment, there's still a chance that he makes a desperate effort to wage an aggressive war against the western region. In this light, we must retain a certain number of soldiers in the First Army to defend against a possible attack from the King's City. I see. Roland nodded. A military force of 50 soldiers was decidedly a little too thin. They would possibly suffer a great loss if demons speared them far away from somewhere out of their sight. In order to prevent this happening, Roland would need Lightning and Maggie to scout around in the air. Meanwhile, he had to also rely on Sylvie's perspective view. The ideal combination would be a hot air balloon in concert with ground forces, a few witches responsible for close-range combating and guarding, and a flintlock squad in charge of long-distance attacks. In that case, however, witches on Sleeping Island would also know there was a sleeping beauty in the relic. After a thorough reflection, Roland decided to include Sylvie, since the most important thing for this rescue operation was personal safety. When Roland was about to turn the subject to the details of the rescue plan, Mystery Moon cried out in a low voice. Heaven, what's that? Everybody was stunned when looking outside the window. Roland pushed the window open in disbelief. The sullen sky had been covered with white elves which swirled and drifted down silently to the ground. Roland stuck out his hand. He felt a cold sensation as the little white dot of feather descended on his hand. It was snowing. This was out of usual. As far as he knew, it only snowed once in winter in the western region, and it was not even winter yet. Would it normally snow in the second month of fall? Roland eyed Iron Axe, who also looked at the snow sternly. Iron Axe slowly answered, "During my stay at the town over the past 7 or 8 years, I've never seen this." Snow meant the arrival of the months of demons. At that time, the sun would be overspread by dark clouds. Before it once again peeped through the clouds, the entire western region would be under the attacks of demonic beasts. The whole misty forest would be filled with these fierce monsters. It would thus be pretty dangerous to travel somewhere beyond the city wall and almost impossible to transport witches with a hot air balloon, not to mention sending out the first army. In view of the above-noted factors, Roland had no choice but to suspend his rescue operation for now until the sky cleared up. As the temperature in fall did not normally drop that fast, Roland truly thought the heavy snow was just temporary and would cease in no time. To his disappointment, however, the town was wiped out by snow 3 days later. The forest and distant mountains were all covered with a thick layer of white muslin. It would definitely be a breathtaking view in the modern world. Unfortunately, at this point, Roland did not have the slightest intention to appreciate its beauty. Although the snow had become noticeably less heavy than earlier, snowflakes still sprinkled here and there. The First Army was currently on a full alert and patrolled upon the new city wall regularly every day. Tents were pitched at the foot of the city wall so that soldiers could get prepared for the upcoming war in a timely fashion. As the temperature decreased almost on a daily basis, soldiers had changed their attire from shirts to winter jackets. Roland's heart sank on the 4th day when he received the news from the front. The west wall was attacked by demonic beasts. That meant the months of demons arrived 1 month earlier than usual. Chapter 320, Sleeping Spell. In Sleeping Island of the Fjords. I'd never thought that Sleeping Spell's first patron would be you. Tilly laughed as she served up a steaming bowl of fish soup. Thanks for your help in finding the ruins and Shadow Islands. You're welcome. Thunder received the soup. I'll be willing to enter those mysterious waters a few more times even if I'm not rewarded. Honestly, without the witches traveling together, the area to the east of Shadow's Island is absolutely dangerous and forbidden to an explorer. He took a sip of the soup and exhaled a mouthful of hot air. Ah, blacktail fish soup is absolutely delicious. Neither black tea nor ale was popular in the fjords. The people here were used to having a bowl of cold fish jelly during midsummer, and when temperatures were lower, they would have a bowl of boiled fish soup instead. When cooked, different kinds of fishes had very different tastes. This was a custom that Tilly learned about only after coming to Sleeping Island. Is that why you couldn't wait to come and patronize Sleeping Spell? Correctly speaking, I was eager to begin my next adventure. Thunder laughed heartily. The last time in the ruins, the scene I saw through my telescope was stunning. I wished so bad that I could fly over to see what there was on the land, and why a stone gate appeared on the cliffs. Is that so? Tilly poured a cup of fish soup for herself. You should know that I intend to visit Border Town. This is because I wish to have a good talk with the leader of the Witch Cooperation Association and, at the same time, experience the Western region's months of demons. You won't be going with us to have a look? Thunder remained silent for a moment before he put on a grin and replied, I think not. She's probably living well over there, and it's fine this way. As an explorer, you never know when an accident will happen after all. I've already lost her mother, and I don't want to lose her too. When the time comes, I hope you'll. I will. Tilly nodded her head. She's one of us after all. Laughing gently, she continued, but remember, business is business. Though you've helped us a lot, the cost of hiring witches will be calculated according to the book. Of course. Business is always business. This is the fjord's tradition. Thunder drank up the remaining soup and laughed even louder. So, who did he hire? After seeing Thunder depart from the palace, Ashes walked into the hall and sat cross-legged beside Tilly. Magic servant Molly, door of random orbit, and puppet shadow. Tilly laid open the agreement. The fees are set at more than 4,800 gold royals. It's generous, isn't it? 4,000, Ashes gaped in wonder. Where did he get so much money? Don't forget that he's the most famous explorer in the fjords. The princess smiled. He can attain a huge fortune whenever he discovers a new navigation route or digs up a treasure. That explains why he has the financial ability to consistently hire a large number of experienced personnel to accompany him in exploring mysterious and dangerous regions. His risk is heavily reduced with the witches around. Using money to offset risk has been a worthy transaction since time ancient. But, is this really good? Ashes seemed unconvinced. While the establishment of a bounty guild can bring huge fortune to Sleeping Island, the witches' abilities will be revealed as a result. If the church learns of them. Sleeping Spell was a new guild established by Tilly. Here, explorers of the Fjord Islands could hire witches with suitable abilities to help them complete their adventures. Of course, aside from its primary business, there were also various convenience services on offer, such as reparation of damaged items, crafting of several exquisite artworks, fast house construction, as well as floriculture and fumigation. As long as the witch's abilities were not made use of for evil, Sleeping Spell could offer any service. However, the downside to all this was that their abilities were publicized. Tilly held Ash's hand. Haven't I already told you that I don't care about the gold royals, but rather, what I hope is to use the Bounty Guild to enable more people to understand Sleeping Island and build up friendly relations. Thunder said something which I agree very much with: fear comes from the unknown. It's the same with witches. The Fjord Islanders and the kingdom's citizens' fear of us simply arises from the church's slander and their own ignorance. I have no means to force them to initiate contact with and understand us. All I can do is to publicize our identity positively and tell them that our power doesn't come from demons, as well as that our abilities aren't overly uncanny. Witches are normal people before their awakenings, and therefore are essentially humans too. When there's greater mutual understanding, the fear will disappear. She took a breath and continued, as for the church, they've never cared about what abilities we have. The Judgment Army has always been responsible for capturing witches, while at times the God's Punishment Army would be mobilized. There isn't much difference among our abilities in front of the God's Stone of Retaliation. I hope that you're right, Ashes said softly. I only know how to fight and kill. I won't be of much help in this regard. You've already helped me plenty. Tilly laughed. To develop and expand Sleeping Island, the most important thing to do is to build relations among the Fjord Islands. Fostering mutual understanding is a long process. I'm doing all this simply to speed up this process as much as possible. There's also a further use for the Bounty Guild. She stuck out her tongue and revealed a sly grin. And that's to find new uses for abilities which seem to be useless at the moment. This way, our non-combat witches won't feel depressed that their abilities aren't useful. Ashes seemed to be amused by her expression. You always have so many reasons, one after the other, that it's difficult for anyone to refute you. Because I'm always right. Tilly smirked. Let's change the topic. Maggie has still not returned to Sleeping Island. Did something happen over there? Perhaps she's being delayed by something. Ashes pondered briefly. Or perhaps. What? She doesn't want to come back. She answered while shrugging her shoulders. Compared to the fjords, living conditions over there are much better. I'd long advised you not to send witches there. What will we do if Lotus and Honey also refuse to come back? Then we shall go over, Tilly replied. All right, I'll go and make preparations. What? Ashes seemed dazed for a moment before she regained her senses. We'll go over. Princess Tilly curled her lips. Haven't we already agreed that we'll help him to fight the demonic beasts before we fetch the other witches back? Without Lotus, the immigrants from the Crescent Moon Bay will have no houses to live in next year. There's still more than a month before winter. Do we really have to go so early? The journey will take considerable time. If Border Town has indeed run into some trouble, we may be able to assist the Witch Cooperation Association by reaching early. And... She blinked several times. I want to see how that obnoxious elder brother of mine has changed. Chapter 321, The Laws of Border Town. Roland was awakened by the cold early in the morning. He climbed out of his chilly bed, put on a woolen coat, and placed his feet in a pail of warm water. This was the kind of corrupted privilege only he could enjoy as a prince. Every morning, maids would place the pail of warm water beside his bed, and also fetch a clean towel and a cup of warm milk. This way, his body could quickly regain warmth. Of course, he considered this to be restrained compared to the great nobles who often had their servants to warm their beds. The prince had brought over his chief maid, Tyre, for this reason, but unfortunately, she died before he got to enjoy it. Roland was not in favor of this practice, and thus, he handed the vacant position to a senior and highly experienced old maid. It turned out to be the correct choice. Though the castle accommodated many witches at present, she was able to keep the castle's interior spick and span. The flames in the fireplace had gone out, leaving behind only a trace of white ashes. Gusts of cold wind slipped through the window cracks behind his back, causing him to feel a piercing chill. It was hard to believe that it was still mid-autumn. Roland wiped his feet dry, cleaned himself up with another pail of warm water, and then walked up to and closed the window which had been left open overnight. Although open fireplaces were very common during this era, he remained worried about carbon monoxide poisoning, and thus, he would leave a gap in the window when he slept. For the first half of the night, the room temperature could be maintained at a warm level, but as the firewood was burned up, the temperature became similar to outdoors by the early hours of the morning. I should think of a way to solve this problem, Roland thought, or else, I won't be able to sleep in anymore. After breakfast, he led Nightingale, the chief knight, and a bunch of guards to the city wall area to conduct a routine inspection. There was a huge patch of grass between the new and old city walls. At this time, it had turned into a white expanse. As they walked over the piles of thick snow, they could hear a creaking sound beneath their feet. Roland raised his head and saw that the sky was a faint gray. On occasion, a lump of snow would drift against his neck, bringing with it a chilly feel. He was aware that this weather would likely last until the coming spring, or even longer. How's the situation at our defense line? Much better than last time. Carter Lannis seemed to be perfectly calm. Most of the First Army soldiers have battle experience and carry revolving rifles. A city wall of approximately 100 meters in length only requires 10 guards to suppress demonic beasts clattering below. Plus, the new city walls are higher than the old ones by half a meter. Even demonic wolves will find it difficult to leap on top of the city walls, and as such, they become shooting practice for our soldiers. As long as demonic hybrid beasts don't appear, it's impossible for our defense line to be breached. That's great. As Roland climbed to the top of the city wall, the soldiers raised their heads and puffed out their chests to salute him. Judging from their spirits alone, they were completely different from the initial militia soldiers. When he visited at that time, although the militia stood on the city wall and thrust their spears uniformly, it was nothing more than a conditioned reflex which they had trained repeatedly. Their eyes seemed numb and their movements were rigid. On closer inspection, he even saw that most of their legs were trembling slightly. This time, confidence oozed from the expression in the soldiers' eyes. After saluting, they turned their sights straight ahead and resumed their watch on the battlefield. As he cast his glance along the city walls on the side that led towards Misty Forest, he realized that this area appeared to be much busier than the rest. The temporary residences constructed for the serfs and refugees were situated in this area. As he looked down from the top of the city wall, he saw that long inclined tracks were arranged in parallel like undulating waves. Along each of these tracks were built 10 or so houses, whose structure was identical to that of cave dwellings. The thick earthen walls served to maintain indoor temperature, and together with heated brick beds and linen blankets, the inhabitants were kept away from the cold. The entire settlement was divided into two zones. The zone closer to the city walls was called the Western Zone and was arranged for refugees. The zone further away from the city walls, called the Eastern Zone, was partitioned and given to the serfs. Every day, the city hall would send men here to distribute food and charcoal. In return, the refugees performed logistical errands for the First Army guarding the city wall. As for the serfs, most had already stored up sufficient wheat for themselves. Except a few hard-working ones who came out to find odd jobs and earn a little extra cash for themselves, the rest of the serfs rarely stepped out of their warm houses. All of a sudden, a heated argument was heard from the direction of the Eastern Zone. Roland looked towards where the sound seemed to be coming from, only to see a group of people gathered on the main road in the center of the residential area, loudly arguing over something. One of them was wearing a blue and white uniform which suggested that he was a city hall officer. The quarrel soon escalated into a brawl. Two groups of people fought against each other, turning the scene into a mess. "Your Highness?" Carter asked. "Let's have a look." Roland nodded. Roland's party made its way towards the location of the trouble. The chief knight took the lead by charging straight into the brawling mob. With 2 or 3 blows, he quickly subdued several of the rowdiest brawlers. Roland's guards pulled out their swords and urged everyone to stop fighting. Before long, the situation was brought under control. When the two groups of commoners discovered that the arriving party was none other than the Lord himself, they kneeled on the ground all at once. "What's your name?" Roland looked fixedly and frowned at the officer, who had taken 2 punches on his face. "What happened here, and who attacked you first?" "Your Highness, I'm Koya Harvey," the officer replied in a shrill voice while covering his face, "and it was that damn refugee wearing a brown linen shirt who hit me first. I was distributing food when he jumped on me like a vicious dog." The refugee whom Koya pointed at raised his head and retorted. "Your Highness, the matter isn't as he said. These people colluded with the serfs to extort us. They're charging us a price for every portion of oatmeal. When your Highness took us in, you clearly said that all these would be distributed for free." Roland felt slightly surprised. The Eastern region refugees had already been checked through by the city hall. Those among them who were craftsmen, possessed special skills, or were literate had been shifted into an inner ring. In principle, the remaining ones should only be peasants. However, judging from his manner of speech and vocabulary, he did not quite seem to be a peasant. By comparison, the city hall officer, whose mouth was full of expletives, was very disappointing. From his name and surname, Roland could guess that he was probably a knight who pledged allegiance to Duke Ryan. "I indeed say so. Before your people are officially incorporated into Border Town, oatmeals and residences will be provided for free," Roland repeated his original words in front of all the refugees. "At present, my words are still effective. Your Highness is benevolent. Long live the Lord." "Thank you, Your Highness." The refugees kowtowed and exclaimed. Koya Harvey's face turned a ghastly pale at once. "However, within my territory, fighting and injuring others is always an offense, especially assaulting a city hall officer." Roland signaled to his guards. "Arrest all of the refugees and serfs who laid hands on others, and bring them to the castle. I'll handle this case myself." After a brief pause, he glanced with interest towards Koya. "I'll also like to ask you about what's with the pricing of the oatmeal." Chapter 322, Western Territory Security Bureau. When Roland returned to the castle hall, he sat back on the seat of honor and looked down at his subjects. From his memory, the former Prince Roland had exercised his right to adjudicate only once, and that took place shortly after he arrived in Border Town. After he fell out with the nobles and became dissatisfied with life, he handed over all of his responsibilities and matters to Barav and never took interest in them again. When everyone involved was present, Roland announced the start of the trial. Each party was allowed to state their reasons before Roland interrogated them. With Nightingale's secret assistance, his duty as a judge became relaxed and easy. He neither had to work out who was lying or being insincere nor needed to have an overbearingly meticulous heart. The whole story of the matter soon became clear. After being stripped of his status as a knight, Koya Harvey harbored some discontent. At the same time, he was sick of the tedious paperwork at the city hall. He thus decided to take his grievances out on the refugees. While distributing oatmeal to them, he deliberately charged a price, and then drove a wedge between them and the serfs by claiming that the serfs had not turned over their grains accordingly, which caused the stock of wheat to be insufficient and therefore unable to be distributed for free. In fact, Koya had been collecting a price for the oatmeal for several days. As he would wear the unmistakable uniform of the city hall and the refugees were worried of reprisal from the officials, most of them chose to remain silent. This made Koya grow even bolder. Only today, when a refugee by the name of Vader came forward to protest at Koya's measures and stirred up a commotion, the matter was brought to light. After Roland understood the circumstances, he let out a sigh of relief. During an organization's development phase, it would typically be full of vigor and vitality. After it stabilized, corruption and inflexibility would become inevitable. However, these problems should only occur after the unification of the Kingdom of Grey Castle. If they arose at such an early stage, then the organization was destined not to go far. As things stood, it was fortunate that this incident was caused by the individual behavior of Koya Harvey, and did not involve other City Hall officials. Furthermore, the matter was only extortion of money, instead of what Roland would be most worried about, collusion with the serfs to resell and traffic grains. Of course, he was also at fault for this incident. Initially, when the City Hall was desperately short of manpower, he did not arrange any screening or training, and simply assigned all of the surrendered knights to Barav after giving them a warning. As the outcome of this case showed, not everyone could accept this job without complaint while having to endure the psychological blow of falling from a knight to a commoner. Roland summoned Barav to his side and asked softly, "How would a lord usually handle a situation like this?" "Your Highness, there are two kinds of situation," the latter replied respectfully. "If the offender is a noble, he may pay a few gold royals and be spared from further punishment. The offense of a commoner who assaults a noble can be deemed either big or small. The punishment may range from amputation to flogging. But Koya isn't a noble." The prince shrugged his shoulders. "I'd taken away his title." "Understood, Your Highness. If that's so, the verdict entirely depends on the Lord's mood." "Nothing is fixed?" Barav shook his head. Roland furrowed his brows. "If it entirely depends on my mood, it means that it doesn't matter how I deal with the commoners. It seems that in the eyes of nobles, they aren't people who need to be taken and treated seriously. Aside from chopping off their limbs, flogging, pulling their nails and similar punishments, is there anything more normal? Like imprisonment." "Imprisonment?" Barav was taken aback. "Your Highness, you mean to simply lock them up? That doesn't count as a punishment. Prison is but a temporary place to hold criminals while they await trial. If we keep them locked up, you'll have to provide them with food. To some people, this could even be seen as a form of reward." "All right. Seems like fixed-term imprisonment, which is used extensively in later ages, can't be applied here." Roland pondered for a moment and decided to follow the rules in the Kingdom of Grey Castle. He stood up and swept his glance across the entire hall. "I'll now pronounce my judgment. Koya Harvey. For dereliction of duty and extortion of refugees, from today onwards, he shall be removed from his duties in the City Hall and be banished to labor in the mines for 10 years. He shall also pay a fine equivalent to 3 times the amount he earned from extortion. Vader. For instigating an assault on a City Hall officer, he shall be sentenced to 10 lashes. As for the rest of the refugees and serfs who participated in the brawl, each of them shall pay a fine of 2 silver royals or be sentenced to 5 lashes. Oatmeal shall continue to be distributed for free. The extortion money shall be returned in full." He peered at the City Hall director. "You shall be in charge of carrying out the above rulings. The final outcomes must be declared to the people living in the provisional residence area." "Yes, Your Highness," Berev answered while making a bow. When Roland returned to his office, he leaned back on his chair and stretched his body. He promptly felt a pair of hands place itself on his shoulders and begin to massage him gently. He closed his eyes to enjoy this moment of relaxation. From this incident, Roland had become aware that as the population of his subjects rose and the authority of the city hall rapidly increased, it was perhaps time for him to address the issue of internal supervision. Yet, he did not wish to establish an organization akin to a procuratorate, or more so to have an independent public security unit. The former would require a large number of literate personnel, and was prone to cause mutual conflicts and blame-pushing, which would hinder the implementation and expansion of new policies. On the other hand, the latter would insidiously diminish his own powers, such as in legislation, judicial interpretation and jurisdiction, all of which he felt would be better off under his control. What he needed was a simple and effective system which would not require too many personnel in order to serve the functions of supervision. He clutched the hand on his shoulder. Nightingale dissipated her mist and held on to the prince's hand as she sat back on the table. Tilting her head, she asked, "What's the matter?" As she swayed her slender legs over the edge of the table, her high deerskin boots and tight pants formed a perfect curve. Roland coughed twice before he spoke. "I intend to set up a new department which will supervise the city hall as well as arrest individuals or groups who threaten the stability of the western region. This department shall only answer to me, and will be independent of the city hall and the First Army." He enunciated his words clearly. "For the time being, I shall call it the Western Territory Security Bureau. I hope to put you in charge of this department." "Me?" She blinked her eyes in surprise. "Indeed. Only you can easily distinguish truth from falsities. No form of deception will work in your presence." Roland nodded in approval. "How about it? If you accept, I'll even offer you alone the drinking afternoon tea with ice cream in winter, or..." Nightingale gently pinched his hand. "Even without this offer, I'll agree to your request as long as it's something you want." Roland suddenly felt a little embarrassed. She laughed and broke the silence before it turned awkward. "But, what do I have to do?" The supervision part is really easy." The prince adjusted his emotions. "I'll install a letterbox for reporting offenses at the castle gate. All you have to do is to verify the contents of the letters received." The most cost-effective solution was indubitable to enable public supervision as well as let the city hall supervise itself, similar to how he arrested spies who infiltrated Border Town during the previous year's Months of Demons. The downside of this method, which came from a later age, was that both the accused and the accuser would need to be meticulously verified. There would also be cases of false or mistaken reports, not to mention frame-ups. However, these problems would become insignificant with Nightingale's ability. It would be easy to verify information simply through face-to-face interrogation. Furthermore, by rewarding the accuser if he was found to be truthful, while punishing false accusations and information, this reporting system would certainly be highly effective. As for maintaining the stability of the Western region and eliminating threats and dangers, it'll be best to have an internal intelligence system. I'll slowly supply more men to you until you have enough eyes to watch over the entire Western region.